Good. So we'll get some way into this, I think, and this will help set up next week's assignment as well. So, and we'll come back to some of these other pieces like scaling as we go along. All right, so mechanisms. So I've told you that, or made this claim that there are these heavy tail distributions all over the place. Many of them have power law size distributions, at least in the tail. So why is that? What are the mechanisms that lead to these things? For a long time, people were very happy just to measure exponents and say, you know, mine is different to this one, or it just is a power law, and that was enough. But you know, why is it of this nature? All right, Pratchett is doing well. I want to look at Pratchett. Let's have a brief Pratchett break. No. Why did you not give me Pratchett? All right, it's lost. It's a tragedy. Okay, all right. He's doing well. Let's see. So, I might not show all of this, but the first, this piece is going to be very important. So random walks, there's a lot of just good stuff in here. Some combinatorics, some counting, some universality, because we'll get the Gaussian out, beautiful things. But we'll also get power laws out in weird ways, which is strange. And you know, randomness leading to structure is an important thing. And there is a strong piece here, which is just variable transformation. If there's a relationship between two parameters of a system that is maybe an inverse power law, and that's very easy to understand, then you can have one of them be distributed, you know, maybe as an exponential or something quite benign with, again, a good explanation, but the other one will follow a power law size distribution. So that's a good thing. We'll come back to that later too with all sorts of things. So Ministry of Random Walks, this is the hat, it's a John Cleese reference for you. Okay, don't have to worry about it. All right, so some postcards. So this normal, so lots of normal distributions are everywhere. They're great, but they're quite boring, and it's fantastic we understand them, but they are not surprising. So this is where we're going, which is more of a Princess Bride reference, right? Mountains of unusual size. Okay, so this is a big story in general, right? So the structure comes out of randomness, and it kind of has to, right? We start off as a big soup, and gravity makes things, which is a big deal. We'll get to that later. But random walks are a pretty spectacular thing, and lots of structure comes out of random walks. So we're just going to have one spatial dimension. Time and space are discrete, so you imagine this little grid here, that's where we'll live. Time is just going to clock away like this. We'll have time going this way. And you could step, there's really just one dimension here. So our walker, our random walker or our random texter is just going to step this way or this way. That's the thing. So this is the old framing. I've been trying to update that to being a texter. Need to do that. I feel bad about that. That's the Australian aspect of my heritage there. So the small town next to where I grew up in the bush, and the small town next to us called Rainbow of all names, had at one point, it's a small stats thing, took over the mantle from Darwin as having the highest beer drinking per capita in Australia, which is impressive. They drink a lot of beer in Darwin. Interesting playing cricket against those people. So, like, they go to the pub in the middle of the game. It's not good. Good people. If permanently drunk. So we're going to have this little thing here, this little epsilon. It's going to be either +1 or -1. So you imagine flipping a coin, it's a head or a tail or a head, however you want to frame that, and just a chance either way. That's it. Simple, super simple. And you can have, these things get elaborated. We can make time continuous and talk about Wiener processes and all sorts of things. It's crazy. Okay, this is just a few example runs, right? You just set up you can do this in whatever system you have. It's kind of fun to look at randomness. And so I don't know what's going on now with Las Vegas, but at some point, so Las Vegas, you had to, gambling, you had to actually pull something to start with. So there was some involvement, and then it got to being just a button. So you just go boink, like this. And then at some point you put your credit card in and just watch, and just go, watch this. And we'll make stories out of anything, so this is actually kind of interesting to look at. Even though this is pure randomness, right? And these are just, of course I've selected some, so maybe I did something bad there. But what we're going to be interested in is, well, over time, there's a first basic thing, which is just where do we expect our random walker to be, right? And that's, that is a beautiful story, and it's going to be normal distributions, so this is a central limit theorem. But then we're going to ask another question, and this gets to the gambling side of things. So basically, you shouldn't gamble, obviously. This is another PSA for do not gamble. Given you're at 0, right? So maybe you're playing a game where you get however many heads there are minus the number of tails that have been in this game so far. That's how much money you have. So this is not great, right? But you get back to even, yeah, and so on. And then you get, so generally speaking, you think this is, I mean, on average, it has to be even. Yeah? So so we can start to ask a few other more complicated things. So what's the expected time between ties? And I know I prefaced this the other day. What's the average time it will take, if it's a tie right now, what's the average time it will take to get back to being a tie? And if you're ahead by 1, what's the average time that it will take to get back to being ahead by 1, or going back to 0? You can think about those sorts of problems. Or if the other team is ahead by 10, what should you do? Stop. But it would look like there are some pretty long patches. And again, these are just examples. We could run a little simulation. This one's got a lot of returns to the origin, and then it takes off this way, right? Losing. We'll think of bottom as losing. Here you think you're a champion, even though you've done absolutely nothing. And in this case, long stretch here where it's got away. And then you can think about also what's the typical, after n of these coin flips, what's the typical width of this, right? We're going to start to fill in a distribution. It's going to be a Gaussian. What's the typical standard deviation for that? How wide, and how does that width grow with time? Really good fundamental thing. But the parallel piece that we'll get out that's fun, that makes this kind of a little piece to put in here is, what's the distribution for the number of time steps between ties?